I never actually played Battle Network 5 for the Game Boy Advance. No, I was late enough to the party that I was able to pick up Double Team for the DS instead. Probably would have just picked one version and stuck with it if that deal wasn't available. Either way, when it comes to this game, I've previously played both. I remember being over the moon when it came to Team Colonel, but feeling kind of lukewarm about Team Proto Man. When I mentioned this previously, someone raised an eyebrow, making me think that maybe I just didn't get some of the tech down. So when it came time to replay the set, I had two things I was curious to find out. Would I still be all about Team Colonel while poo-pooing on Team Proto Man, and would I notice the lack of all the missing features that the DS port had compared to GBA? Ideally, I'll end this thinking that both versions are pretty keen and not feeling like I'm missing out too much with the originals, but I get the feeling that the first is a lot more likely than the second. So, with my own personal history laid out, I'm Wes, the Explosion, ready to discuss the world of Liberation missions. So after running an errand for Mother, Lance called to Scilab by his father, asking him to bring along all his friends so that he can show him something pretty keen. Of course, before the big reveal, things go sideways when the bad guy from last game breaks in and kidnaps Dr. Hikari, along with all the net navies of Lance's friends. This, understandably, bums everyone out, but Lance soon has other things to worry about when he's approached by either series veterans Chad and Proto Man, or newcomers Beryl and Colonel, depending on version. They tell him that they're putting together a team to take down Dr. Regal's group, Nebula, and they're looking for only the best, which means Land and Mega Man. Thus we begin the cycle of briefly meeting a new prospective member, completing a dungeon or puzzle, then fighting said prospective teammate for whatever reason, then everyone working together to solve this chapter's mission. The game's main theme seems to be creating a better world for the next generation to set them up for success so that they can make things better still, which is a message that has been touched on in the past. Still, it ain't a bad one, and while this game's tone feels a lot sillier and more anime-inspired, them really doubling down with some of the power of friendship bits, I'm a sucker for that sort of thing, so I find the writing in this one really fun. One complaint I do have though is that some of the dialogue is reused between versions, shared between each's equivalents, even when it sounds like something only the one would say, and it gives the impression that you're talking more to a script than a character. Still though, you get to be best friends with all these cool characters that you recruit for your team. How awesome is that? It's like they read my secret journal where I wrote all my deepest fantasies in when I was an adolescent. Wait, am I still recording? Double Souls return again, as do most mechanics from the previous entry, though in an actually competently put together game this time. Unlike last time, where each of the transformations charge attack at a set amount, here, powering up your buster seems to actually increase their damage output, so the mechanic is also a lot stronger. I seriously feel like I'm cheating using some of these. I'll be discussing the Double Souls in their own video, so keep an eye out for that if you want specifics. Dark chips have been tweaked a bit. Now there are 12 you can find, typically by making illicit deals with NPCs that you can then add to your folder, rather than them just magically showing up when you're in a pinch. I'm a good kid though, and didn't use one once. Well, other than to test out this new feature. You can stack a dark chip to use a Double Soul this time, for a transformation called a Chaos Unison. It doesn't give you major penalties, like decreasing your max HP that using them normally will do, and it only lasts one turn. It swaps your charge attack for the effect of the dark chip you used, though the timing for releasing it needs to be really spot on, it getting narrower and narrower the more you use it, and if you screw it up... Holy crap! What's happening? Is he using my chips? He has no HP listed, how do I get rid of him? Moving on... There are two major shakeups to the Battle Network formula this time around, and while I want to save the bigger one for later to build up anticipation, they're both so game-changing that I really can't decide which is the bigger deal. Okay, so this one might be obvious from the game's title, but you can play as other navies for specific sections. In addition to Mega Man and the team leaders, each version gets 5 additional members. Team Proto Man enlisting Magnet, Gyro, Napalm, Searchman, and OC Girl Medi, while Team Colonel gets Knight, Shadow, Tomahawk, Number, and Toadman. Only 4 of these guys are new, the majority of the rest are all pulling from Battle Network 2, which is interesting. Maybe since this is the second game in the Nebula arc, they figured it was appropriate. Anyway, like Double Souls, I'll be going over the navies in their own video since talking about each would be a lot, but if you're trying to pick a version, I think you can choose confidently based off of their previous appearances or just which of the original Robot Masters you like. Just about all of them are a blast to use. While he is the title character, so I'd understand if Rockman.EXE was the only one we got to play, being able to use the other navies, especially so many, really adds a lot of fun and variety to the gameplay. The other big change kinda ties into this and is so divisive that it's largely the reason why a lot of people really didn't love this game, and even more might have decided to drop the series after getting this right after 4, the Liberation missions. You get thrown into an area with your team, overrun by the bad guys, and you have to make your way to the end. Every turn you can use each of your members to try and clear a path through the dark panels blocking your way. Choose a panel to liberate and you'll get a virus battle, but it's a little different than usual. First off, you only have 3 rounds to clear it, otherwise you fail and that's a wasted turn for the character you selected. The trip screen comes up automatically, so no denying yourself to drag things out. Second, the layout of the battlefield isn't necessarily half you and half your opponents, it's all dependent on how many dark panels are around you. If they're only directly in front of you, it's even. If there's one extra to the side, you lose a column, and if you're surrounded on 3 sides, you get 2 columns in the middle and the rest belong to the enemy. If you're really on top of things though, you can manipulate things so that you start out with some extra room instead. If you manage to clear a battle in 1 round, you get a 1-turn liberate and claim all the dark panels around you as a bonus. So maybe you sometimes go for a disadvantageous situation to try and claim more territory, or just to cut a more direct route through the map. There's also a few special panels. Bonus panels give you something extra when you stop a roulette, from health, battle chips, zenny, the like, and it doesn't cost you a move to activate. Item panels drop similar stuff when you claim them, though some also hold keys that you need to advance, and some are also traps, so be careful. Then there are dark holes, which you need to clear in order to open up the boss. They spawn 1 sub-boss at a time, which will attack during the enemy phase if they're close enough, and you'll be faced with one of these enemies, plus a few regular viruses when you try to claim the hole. Take them out though, and you'll clear all the squares surrounding the hole, as well as any sub-bosses that popped out of it as a bonus. As for the bosses themselves, you're still limited to trying to beat them in 3 rounds. During their turn, they can attack anyone in range and recover some of their health, though you can dogpile your entire team during your turn, so it's not as insurmountable as it might sound. Each of your teammates have board skills they can use to help out, beyond their basic combat abilities, doing stuff from clearing extra spaces, protecting teammates from enemy attacks, or clearing traps. Most of these actions requiring order points. You start the map with 3, but you can find more in item panels. Use your team right to clear the map as efficiently as possible, and if you manage to win within a certain time limit, you get a bonus chip, typically a Navi chip of the boss you beat. You can also replay them whenever you want if you want another crack at it. You lose if you retreat or all your members are taken out, though you can have a Navi refill some HP by passing, and even when they're knocked out, they recover after a turn, so you have to be really reckless to fail. Things are a lot more strategic this time, not that assembling the perfect folder wasn't already, and with the format change and all the new steps you have to learn, it wouldn't surprise me if someone found it frustrating. Fear not though, because the maps and item placements are locked, so if you're getting annoyed, you can just look up the layout to find out what you need, or just plan the most efficient route so that you have to engage with liberation missions as little as possible. I, for one, really like them though. This entry has 5 dungeons, kind of a middle ground between the early games and the middle ones which pared back on them. Especially 4. You get the main computer, which is a few twisted paths with some light puzzles where you have to move around some data based on clues to form the right sequence. A few tripped my brother and I up, but writing them out made the solutions obvious. While it's on the shorter side, it still feels a bit longer than the typical starting dungeon. The drill complex is a series of 4 areas where you have conveyor belts and boulders, the latter being there to block your path and knock you off. You can punch through them, but some are sturdier than others, so it's sometimes a better idea to just weave around them. I kinda like this one, but getting interrupted by random encounters when you're trying to navigate the moving floor can really mess you up, so I wouldn't call it perfect. You have to come back to this one a few times, but the obstacles are turned off on return trips, so things aren't quite so bothersome. I'd say the ship computer is probably the low point of the game, having to navigate an underwater maze while your oxygen ticks down. There are jets of bubbles that can push you around and whirlpools that seem to materialize out of nowhere at points, killing your progress as well as your air supply. Pair that with some of the worst virus encounters, in my opinion, and I do not have fun in this place, but at least when you find the keys to open up the main path, it's a pretty straight shot to get back through if you need to jack out. Then there's the gargoyle computer, where you need to find ninja progs to disarm traps. Passing one will swap it with the one that's currently following you, and linking the same colors will add an extra to your retinue. The big issues with this are screen size, making it hard to plan a route, and just how long it goes on for, but if you look up a map, it can be fun. Last area, the Dark Chip Factory, is a series of stages where you take in an ally or two and swap back and forth to destroy obstacles and open up a path for each other. While I like liberation missions, Being able to take the extra characters into a more normal level and just go to town is a whole lot of fun, and it might just be my favorite dungeon in the whole series. Still need to replay 6 though. While not all of them are winners, it's not a bad set of levels, and paired with liberation missions, there is a lot of content here. As for the regular net, it's somewhat similar to the last game. Big walkways for the main paths and thinner ones for side stuff, though these sometimes overlap and intersect. Some areas are kinda maze-like, but after you run through them a few times, you start to memorize them. While I think they could be easier to navigate and the amount of repetition could be toned down a bit, I don't hate them. You also get a little reprieve from the twisty turns, since every area also has a screen where the liberation took place, which tend to be pretty wide open and hard to get lost in, though you could also say that these are kinda boring since there's not a lot in them. As for the Undernet, it is once again a whole mess of paths as you've come to expect, which I think works well for the more sinister endgame area. It has a backdoor entrance, which is convenient if you're looking for an easy way in, without all the trekking through the main net. It also connects to the Nebula area, which I haven't really messed with yet, but a quick peek makes it look like a nice mix of new liberation missions, confusing labyrinths, and a screen that seems focused on some high-level boss fights, like you'd expect from the post-game. While I don't think the net looks quite as good as it did in Battle Network 2, I do think it's a lot more interesting to explore than the ones in 1 and 4, so I'd give it my approval. The human world has 5 locations. As always, the first is AC/DC, which retains the same layout from the last game, but to review, it has Lan's house, those of his friends, the park with iconic squirrel statue that apparently did not get demolished between games, thank goodness, and the chip store. Scilab has a long set of stairs leading up to the building, then a lobby with several connecting rooms. There's also a dock you can walk to outside, complete with a cruise ship you can board. Oran Island has a beach, along with a mine that has a maze-like set of tunnels and doors to navigate. Endo City is a tourist attraction, complete with a Japanese castle or pagoda you can wander through. Lastly, there's the final area, Regal's Dark Chip Factory, which is mostly just a series of terminals for you to jack into to continue advancing. None of these gets me excited like some of the past locales, like 2's Netopia or 3's TV station, but they all look nice enough, and while this might not be the biggest roster of locations, at the same time, most of them feel big enough that the game doesn't feel scaled back. There is one major issue I have with them though, and that's all the repetitive running around. This doesn't happen with all of them. Mostly the old mine on Oran, End Castle, and the Dark Chip Factory if you need to backtrack on that last one. But when you have to go through the whole area each time you visit, and you need to come back multiple times, it gets a bit tiresome. Navigating a maze and seeing the sights at a tourist attraction are all well and fun the first time through, but it gets old fast. An option to quick travel through some of these places, or the ability to make some shortcuts for yourself by interacting with the environment would have made the revisits a lot more bearable, but on the plus side, by endgame, you will have the most efficient path through those mines memorized. Thankfully, all of the annoying viruses from last game seem to be gone. While Mets, fanfares, and windboxes return, they've been around for a while, and the Mark cannons replace the plain cannons and Samurai replace swordies. New enemies include the Wood Noses, which attack with miniature versions of itself that also shifts its hitbox as well. These drill things that attack horizontally then vertically, and Electric Oni that attack a full column at a time. Of course, that's only naming a handful, but I like just about all of these guys and find it fun to come up with counters to them. Outside of those damn submarines. On top of being introduced in the worst dungeon in the game, they can submerge underwater like you might expect, and they fire off these anchors and bubbles, which travel diagonally, which is hard to keep track of if you don't watch specifically their shadow. And they launch themselves directly at you if you accidentally pop their bubble. Could really do without them, but otherwise, random encounters are so much better than in 4, like most things. Then there's a handful of sub-bosses from the Liberation missions. The Flaming Wolf moves around before sending a T-shaped fire blast your way. The bird will dive bomb your side of the field a few times in a row, and the Bladia will bide its time before attacking one of your columns and cracking the panels. Not terribly complex, and taking them out mostly involves reacting at the right moment, but they can be fun to fight. A lot of the teammates you have to win over through battle are returning navis from 2, and since you fight a lot of them earlier in this game than their previous iterations, their movesets have been toned down a good bit. Later versions of them though will start majorly ramping up on you, so don't feel too bad about missing out. You've been given a reprieve, not a pardon. Proto Man's doing his blocking and reactionary thing again, so he can be a nightmare when you face higher versions. Magnet Man has magnets and also a bunch of dumb panel effects, so he's actually decently challenging for an early game boss. Gyro Man moves around a lot, and you probably only want to be in front of him when you're ready to attack, otherwise you're leaving yourself open. Napalm Man has turrets that can also block shots, and he fires off explosions, which can feel a bit overwhelming. Search Man shoots and rolls grenades, so move around a lot and you're fine. And Medi is really frickin' easy. Colonel can hit a wide area without a lot of warning, so stack as much damage on him as you can in between his strikes. Nightman is the same as before, blocking with Stone Body before tossing stuff your way and opening himself up to counterattacks. Shadow Man is making more use of his doubles than previously, so watching out for which one has an HP number is important. Or just using attacks that hit everything. Tomahawk does not flinch, his attacks hit a wide range, and he also has a totem pole to support him. He doesn't attack too quickly though, so hit his totem hard enough to deactivate it, then deal as much damage as possible to him before he decides it's his turn. Number Man works similarly to how he did in 1, throwing out explosives that you should destroy before they go off. He actually moves around this time though, and his number balls have higher value, so while not too hard, he is much stronger than his first appearance. Toadman still has his lily pads that he can jump between, but he's a bit easier to hit, especially since he's not constantly firing tadpoles from them to limit your movement. And for the Liberation Mission bosses, Blizzard and Shademan are pretty reasonable given the circumstances. Since you only have 3 rounds to try and take them out, they have patterns that aren't too hard to figure out and not a ton of health, since you are on the clock. Cloudman is a bit more of a pain, since he's constantly putting out clouds that you need to clear in order to hit him, and he always stays in the back row, making it really hard for navies with a limited range. He requires a bit more strategy, a big part of which is a good chip folder. And the boss after that, which I don't want to spoil, but I do want to talk about, I guess skip ahead here for Cosmo Man. Did you do it? Okay, good. Dark Mega is disappointingly easy. I know that they wanted this to be a cool fight where you have to go up against the main character and his chips, but he never seems to pull out anything too heavy hitting or hard to deal with. While I know I complained about the Dark Soul last game just pulling out nasty or annoying stuff willy-nilly, this seems like an overcorrection, and I wish they could have found some sort of middle ground. I normally prep my whole team to jump on the boss in a single turn, but I tend to make this guy into paste before I even get through my second character. Never go for a shootout with Napalm Man when your buster only flinks. Welcome back to those jumping ahead, now on to Cosmo Man. He has predictable attacks with big hitboxes, so he seems overwhelming at first, but isn't too bad. Well, until he does that spammy attack where he just throws a bunch of space rocks at you too fast for you to effectively dodge, but since you only get 3 rounds at a time with him in Liberation missions, this is more of a problem when you fight his ghost. For bonus bosses, Mr. Famous's Navi this time is Gridman, a football player that will summon up to 2 doppelgangers, which will join him in trying to tackle you, as well as hucking the ball at your head because I guess he doesn't understand what an interception is. He's a decent challenge but not insurmountable, and taking out his extras so that they can't attack you when you're dodging the ball is key. Larkman hides in a very specific part of the internet. He moves fast, and while he may not hit the hardest, he can hit a lot. Learning his timing and patterns is really important, and I'd say he's one of the trickier guys to beat here. The final boss, so feel free to skip ahead again. 1, 2, 3... is a hulking behemoth with a will-o-wisp that circles him that's the only vulnerable part. He has 2,000 health, the standard, and he constantly attacks, so you have to balance dodging with taking a shot at his weak spot when it's in your line of sight. Given that there's also a slight delay between using most chips and when you're able to move again, it can be a little tricky. The main threat is him breaking panels and boxing you in, so having air shoes might just be the most important bit of prep you can do. For once, the final battle is only 1 stage, and if you prep properly, I'd say this is one of the easier ones to deal with. Man, my brother is not gonna like me saying that. I only lost to the guy once between both versions though. Overall, it's a pretty solid lineup. While Nebula itself doesn't have too many guys to throw at you, with all the extra team-exclusive characters you can fight and play as, the roster's also pretty sizable. The music's more in line with what I'd expect from the series. Whatever weird filter effect that was bugging me last time isn't there, though my hatred for 4 could have had me imagining things. Still, the music fits well. Scilab has some hustle to it while End City sounds very Japanese, and the main theme with its remixes are on point. The track A Total War for the last dungeon being one of my favorites in the game. The song for Liberation missions does a good job of getting me excited, and while the boss music tends to be pretty quick-paced, with it being paired with a 3-turn limit for Liberation bosses, it really drives home just how much you need to hurry. And the track for the ship comp is really pleasant and relaxing, which probably makes it the most inappropriate pairing. I really like the OST, though I wouldn't put it up quite as high as 2 and 3's. And there just seems to be something a little bit lacking with it, like it could be just a bit more than it is. Actually, put a pin in that for a second. I know exactly where I'm going with that. The visuals have not changed too much. Things still seem to have that softer style from the last game, with the main characters seeming to mostly recycle their sprites. I think a lot of the X-Gospel Navis pull their battle sprites all the way back from Battle Network 2. Most viruses look kinda cute, except for maybe the pulsar bats, which are sort of ugly, but for the most part, characters look from good to fine. As for locations, the real-world ones don't do anything too crazy, but are pleasant enough to look at. N Castle stands out more than the rest, given the very Japanese setting, but that's probably the weeb in me talking. Net stuff is a bit more of a mixed bag, a few places being about as inoffensive as the real world, then the Drill Complex has a lot more details on the floor, and the ship just being a whole lot of blue. Main net looks a little more detailed than the previous game, and while the undernet this time isn't as cool as Snake Way, I do like the melty paths and sinister vibes that it gives out. While not the finest sprite work in the series, there has definitely been worse, and what's here gets the job done. The difficulty is a bit weird in this one. When it comes to virus battles, I can rip through most of these a lot faster than other titles, only the subs being a big problem for me, and each boss feels scaled decently well for when it pops up in the story. If that's all there was to the game, I'd rank it as one of the easier titles, while acknowledging with these being my 7th and 9th playthroughs of one of these games since the collections came out, my natural skill growth could be skewing things somewhat. But as you probably guessed, there's a bit more at play. For most people, whichever game in the series they play first is likely going to be the hardest, since learning how to handle this very unique style of gameplay is a baseline requirement. When I first played through the series, the order was pretty helter-skelter, and I remember thinking 1 and 2, which I got too late, were pretty easy compared to the later games. Going back through, I was surprised by how much trouble these gave me as I did them in order and had to relearn everything. Similarly, 5 adds in a lot of new features, most notably the liberation missions. And not only do you have to really change your thinking with these, I don't think the development team had a full handle on them either. The first 3 being pretty fun in my opinion, while the last 2 were so littered with traps that you either need to go through super carefully and slowly, or just say to hell with it and brute force them while tanking damage. It doesn't feel strategic at all, and while they were maybe expecting people to do them multiple times and learn the maps, which don't change, it's easy to look at the last leg of the game as either hard or frustrating because of this. Then there's just all the navis you have to learn the playstyles of. While you get an email explanation for each of the double souls, there doesn't really seem to be an in-game set of instructions for how your teammates work. Proto-Man has a shield he can use to reflect attacks, and while a comment accused us of forgetting about it, my brother did see it, he just couldn't get it to work consistently. I totally did forget though. Then there's Colonel, who sends out a slash ahead of him to hit whatever's closest in his row. His strike also hits enemies diagonally in front of the contact point, so you can rack up damage on a bunch of enemies if you line them up right. This took me about half of the playthrough to figure out. And that's only 2 navis. The rest, I just played them in the most straightforward way possible, but it would not surprise me at all if there were an input to give Nightman's Stone Body, or somehow charge Napalm Man's Buster instead of it always being a rapid fire. I'll probably look up a guide before I get into some of the post-game stuff, but needing to do outside research for just basic controls is adding another step that typically wouldn't be present. Combat-wise, I don't think this game is too challenging, but needing to adjust your thinking to tackle liberation missions, and figuring out the best tech for each of your new companions certainly can be, so I probably wouldn't recommend this as a game to try out first. Luckily, with it being the 5th entry, it won't be for the majority of people, though even series veterans should prepare to step up their game since they have more than just Mega Man to control this time. As I mentioned before, the first time I played Battle Network 5, it was the enhanced port, Double Team DS. I remember a few things, but it's been so long I'm not 100% on all the upgrades, so I decided to break out the cartridge and give it a look, and okay, don't have a capture card so bear with me on this, but geez, the screen on this thing is small. Both of them. So there's a new intro when you start it up, rather than it just flashing the Capcom logo and then showing the main menu. And the music's been redone a bit as well. This is something I definitely noticed immediately when playing the GBA ports. While the base OST is fine, heck, actually pretty good, the touched up tracks here sound so much nicer that it's hard to appreciate the original. I'll still go back and listen to some of the DS remixes out of the blue. There's even some bonus tracks. Slot in one of your previous games in the DS's front slot, and you'll get a remix of that game's virus-busting theme for your regular battles. There's even an extra remix for Battle Network 5, on top of the one you already get in-game. The menus have been redone to accommodate the touchscreen, and you even get Mega Man just chilling on the bottom, ready to give you advice if you click on him instead of requiring the L button. Jack in, and I have 2 Navis following me, that you can swap between during the chip selection phase in battle. I thought I remembered a simplified Navi cuss for teammates, and this would explain it. Mega Man also talks a bit with a real person voice when you do stuff like swap Navis or win the battle, and you can also display maps of the net on the lower screen, which might be simple but is really nice given how twisty they can be. Looking up the rest, there are a few new sprites, you can hold tournaments with other people via network, there's a few new minigames, and there's some more options added into the Liberation missions, like letting you swap a Navi out for their opposite team counterpart. You mean I could have been switching out Magnet Man for Nightman, Gyro for Shadow, Napalm for Tomahawk? I can only change 3 at a time? No! Well, it's not in this game, so I guess it doesn't matter much. The Legacy collections have so many extras you can download into the game that, initially, I thought if I poked around the patch cards enough, I could do most of this. I did manage to find some of the special chips this way, after all. But nope, most of them are either there to customize your loadout or give you bonus chips in Zenny. The base cross one is pretty nice though. As you probably gathered, the DS port is superior in pretty much every conceivable way, so it's really disappointing to see all these features missing here. Given all the running around you have to do, having those extra Navis to break up the monotony of random encounters adds a lot of value to the game, and my brother really liked Team Proto Man's lineup, but his favorite Robot Master is Toadman, so letting him make just that one substitution would have made his playthrough more enjoyable, to say nothing for all the other little bonuses. While I think the ZX format, with the lower screen smushed into the corner, would have been a bit annoying, I feel like there had to be a middle ground here, and even if there wasn't, I'd have put up with it if that meant getting all the added features. I played this game when I had a much lower understanding of the series, so I wasn't able to appreciate all the DS port allowed, and was also the type that wouldn't do teammate swaps until I'd beaten the game regularly once, so this version was largely wasted on me, making the Legacy Collection replay all the more painful. Luckily, I was able to get through both games before my memory was jogged, but I still had a sense that I was missing out. Maybe I'm asking for too much, since the collections are just ports and what I want is an interweaving of 2 games, but I feel like you could at least have given us a toggle for the music, Capcom. As it stands, and I hate to say this, anyone playing on the Legacy Collection or even on the original GBA is using the lesser version and seriously missing out. But hey, at least we can play it on the big screen now, though you already could on Wii U. Battle Network 5's place in the series is kind of a mess. It comes right after easily the most hated entry, putting it on shaky ground from the get-go. Then, with how much it changed things up, it earned the label of divisive, some loving and others hating just how different it was. Perhaps worst of all is just how much the DS version of it improved upon the original, with that being the only edition not readily available at the time that I'm writing this. I suppose we can hope that new players just won't know what they're missing and enjoy what they have, but that not only feels kind of dishonest, but I also just got done ranting about it, so my audience at least is ruined. Even with all those caveats, I still do really enjoy Battle Network 5, even if I can understand why it might not be everyone's cup of tea. If you already have the second Legacy Collection, I'd recommend giving it a try, and if you get the chance to play Double Team without too much inconvenience to yourself, I'd absolutely say you should give it a go. At the very least, it'll be a nice item to add to your collection. But what do you think? Did this one manage to pull things back from the cliff Battle Network 4 threw the series off? Do you like Liberation missions, or consider them a mistake? Have you played one, both, or even the dual edition of this game? And are you Team Proto Man or Team Colonel? Did I ever get around to answering that? I think I might have put it off for the Double Soul video, though I did drop some hints. To avoid false advertising, I played Team Colonel first originally, then Team Proto, but I switched up the order here. Team Proto Man was fun, but I had a much better time with Team Colonel, so the change helped me to enjoy both. Team Colonel just has cooler party members, a few extra story bits thrown in, they fit my playstyle more, and as embarrassing as this might be to say, if both groups were real, Team Colonel is who I'd rather hang out with. So yeah, if I had to pick a side, I'd go with the most powerful army in history. With my obligations fulfilled, I'd just like to say thanks for watching, and maybe consider subscribing if you enjoy Mega Man content. Ground Crush!